Be seated, please. We appreciate so much your being with us today, and we do have visitors visiting with us, and we're very grateful for your being with us. Perhaps you're here for our special honoring of our graduates here in just a few moments. I quickly did a head count of the 4 graduates. 3 of them obviously grew up here at Lincoln, and they were around 21, 22 years of age at this time when they're in the process of graduating or getting ready to graduate from college. Obviously, being a long tenure here, it's great to be able to see them from 1 or 2 years old now up to college graduates. And certainly we congratulate them, their parents, and anybody else, all their teachers, everybody that had something to do where they're reaching this great milestone within their life. I didn't know, in fact, this sermon was planned and done about a month and a half ago, I guess. So I had no idea that this was going to be the day that we would be doing that. But I thought when I looked at the lesson just a couple of days ago, how appropriate it would be for us to look at this lesson. Because indeed, every day ought to be special. And when we do so, you may recall there in the text, Deuteronomy chapter 5, that twice within those 4 verses, Moses made the emphasis, today. God is speaking to you folks today. And today, those of you who have been through where you are and getting to where you're getting ready to go over into the land of Canaan, today, God's speaking to you. If we want to make the most of life, then there's some things that we need to do every day to be a success, not just in business, not just on our economic welfare, but particularly when it comes to our spiritual welfare. For example, the first thing that I would suggest is that we need to aim high. George Bernard Shaw said it this way: some people see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and say, why not? You think about it, some of God's greatest leaders were those who refused to accept the status quo. For example, I thought about Caleb in Numbers 13. The 12 spies had gone out in Canaan land, and they came back with a great report. It's exactly as God said it would be. In fact, even beyond that. And they started adding negatives to all the great things that they had seen and they had observed that God had promised them would be there. And so when 10 of the 12 began to say, there's no way we can accomplish this great task, it's rather interesting in verse 30 that Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once, for we are well able to overcome that. Now you may recall that Caleb and Joshua are two among the 2 oldest individuals of this generation of people. And yet here's Caleb saying, doesn't matter who they are, we have God on our side. Aim high. Judges chapter 6, Gideon learns the same thing. God's people have not exactly been victorious. They have been overran by the Midianites and the Amalekites and others time after time. And they're destitute. He literally is hiding, winnowing his wheat in a secret place because of the enemies coming over and taking over everything. And the angel of the Lord appears to him and tells him, look, mighty man of God, God selected you to be the next leader. And Gideon just can't figure it out. And he asked that really an interesting question there. Why has this all happened to us if you're still there for us, God? And God gets his interest and tells him what he needs to do. And you may recall that when finally he builds up an army, he has thousands of people men ready to fight. God says that's too many. 10,000 go home. And there's still 22,000 to go home. There's still 10,000. God said, you still have too many. And so through a process of elimination, finally he comes down to 300 men that are able to go in and fight the people and be victorious. But the point of the matter was the reminder that they were to look toward God and see to his needs, not their own needs. Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 15 and verse 20, "And I have made it my aim to preach the gospel." I've made it my aim. Paul, did you have any other things to do? Sure he did. He had to provide for himself. He was a tent maker. But he said, my aim, my purpose is to preach the gospel. Philippians 3 verse 14, "This one thing I do, I press toward the mark of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." If we want to accomplish anything good for the Lord, folks, we need to aim high. But secondly, we also need to do something good every single day. I don't know who said it, but I love this saying. Don't despise little things. A lantern can do something that a sun can never do. Shine at night. Regardless of who we are, regardless of how insignificant, how unimportant, how unintelligent, how lack of a Bible knowledge we may think that we have, there is always something that we can do. James F. Clark said it this way, "If I cannot do great things, then I can do small things in a great way." Cicero, the Roman historian, said, "Let him sing to the flute who cannot sing to the harp." In other words, do something. Regardless of whatever excuse, regardless of whatever issue you may have, there's always something that you can do for the Lord's cause. You know, we find that admonition both in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10, "Wherever your hand finds to do, do it mightily to the Lord." Notice that, do it mightily to the Lord. Not just do it, but do it to the very best of your ability. I have an idea that these 4 graduates, just like any other graduates, had rough days, had rough classes, had rough exams, and sometimes wondered, is this really worth it? Do I really want to do this? We've all been there. But somehow, some way, they found the gumption, and they found the energy, and they found the encouragement, they found the motivation. Likely moms and dads and others made phone calls or visits and say, regardless of what you think, you can do this. Do it heartily to the Lord. Or as Paul said in Colossians 3, whatever you do, do it heartily to the Lord and not to men. See, that's the point that we got to remember. As a child of God, we represent Jesus Christ. We are serving him. Now, mankind may like it, and they may applaud, and they may tell us how great we are, but ultimately, everything that we do to the Lord. Remember Matthew chapter 5, 13 to 16? You're to be a lamp, a light to the world, so that men see your light and give God the glory. Do something good every day. Theodore Roosevelt said, do what you can with what you have where you are. I like that. That's what we're supposed to do. But also avoid becoming double-minded. The Latin proverb, to do two things at once is to do neither. Now think about that. How often is it in life that we get busy about life to the point that we don't do hardly anything well? Now the only exception here are probably moms. Moms have the ability. There's an innate ability in moms to be able to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 things quite well, depending on the number of the children they have, I guess, and the ability that they have and attention to that. But it's so easy to get involved in doing this and this and this to the point that finally we're just so scattered. We can't get and do one thing. Some of you know that we were in Italy a couple of weeks ago. We crossed over a bridge, and the tour guide said, "That's a famous river." And I looked at it. It didn't look very famous. In fact, it was very small and insignificant to me. It wasn't a big river at all. And he said, "This is the river that Julius Caesar said, guys, when we cross the Rubicon, there's no going back." Now that became much more significant. And yes, I have a picture if you'd like to see it sometime. But the point of the matter is, he realized when we cross this, there's no going back. We are headed to Rome. And to Rome he went. And the rest of history got changed because of that. He who begins many things finishes but few, Samuel Johnson said. Psalm 27, verse 4, one thing have I desired of the Lord. One thing. You may recall in Luke chapter 10, Jesus said, but one thing is needed. You see, a lot of times we get caught up in the many things of life. Jesus said, one thing. Or as we've already stated in Philippians chapter 3, this one thing I do. Now, Paul did a lot of things for the Lord. He was involved in a lot of different situations of life. But Paul said, this is my one motivation. This is my one goal. This is the reason that I am working to do what I need to do in order to reach others and to be the kind of Christian that I need to be. It shouldn't surprise us that you and I need to pay attention to detail. One of the so-called church fathers, John Chrysostom, said, faithfulness in little things is a big thing. He's right. Henry Ford Sr., paying attention to simple little things that most people collect makes a few men rich. If you've ever done any kind of study of the Ford company, you will know that that's exactly what they did. There were others that were trying to make certain kinds of engines with certain kind of models. But Henry Ford just refused to be mediocre. He refused to let their lack of success have a difference in regard to his life. But he said, this is what we do. We pay attention to the things that really need to be paid attention to. Turkish proverb says, measure 1,000 times and cut once. Now, most of us wouldn't measure 1,000 times, but it makes pretty good sense, does it not? Think about what Jesus says. Matthew chapter 23. Listen to what he had to say there in that passage, verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe and mint and honest and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the other undone. Chapter 25 and verse 21. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you rule over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. I want to ask you a question. Can you ever think about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John's accounts of Jesus Christ, of Jesus ever doing anything not exactly the right way? And you're saying, well, that's an easy answer because we know that he was perfect. But go back and look at the habits of Jesus Christ in his earthly ministry and what he did every day and what he tried to do to motivate others to do every day. he paid attention to detail. He was very precise in regard to the things that he did in providing for it. He knew that there was food that needed to be taken care of. Somehow he was going to get that food. He knew when he needed to stop and get away from the rest of the people, he'd go to the mountain to pray because he knew that that's what he needed to do at that point in time. There's a phrase in the scriptures that talks about Jesus when he had made his heart or his mind, his purpose to go to Jerusalem. That's exactly what he did. He paid attention to the things that were important. But also, we need to keep going and do and not stop. Thomas Edison said, I start where the last man left off. I don't know how many of us, probably in school, had to run. I know from time to time, at least I'm sure it's still the case, but in PE, the coach would have us to run around the track. And occasionally we'd have races. You can imagine that I never won a 100-yard dash. Never did. Not even close. But think about it. The coach always said, when you start, you finish. Doesn't matter how slow you may be. Doesn't matter where you end up in the pack. If you're going to start, you be sure to finish. Think about it. Have you ever heard anyone give any kind of accolade or a trophy or put their name on some program that was the champion of the 95-yard dash? Think about that. It just doesn't happen, does it? You see, today we look at people and their ability, and we appreciate them and what they are, not so much how they started, but also how they finished. And the same is true for us today, spiritually speaking. So many individuals throughout Scripture have started well. This building and any building like unto it in our entire city, as well as county, is the very same way. So many people started the race of living for Christ, but they didn't finish. And they got satisfied with 50 yards or 60 yards or 30 yards or maybe even 95 yards, but they didn't finish the race. If we're going to do what's right for the Lord's cause, we're going to do it all the way. You ever remember what David said to Solomon? First Chronicles chapter 28. Consider now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong. Notice the last words. Do it. Don't just start. You've seen me, and you know why I'm not being able to build this temple, because I'm a man of blood. I've shed too much blood in wars against others. But I prepared, and I've gotten things ready for you to build this great house. You do it. Didn't Paul say it this way? And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not faint. One translation says, if we do not give up. 2 Timothy chapter 4, I've kept the faith. I've finished the course. I've done all that I needed to do, Paul said. And you may recall there toward the end of that great chapter of chapter 4, which likely were Paul's last words, probably weeks before he was to die by the commands of Nero, that Paul said, the Lord has stood by me and will continue to stand by me. And the same is true for every one of us today, almost 2,000 years later on. It doesn't matter what situation, what calamity, what issues we have to deal with in life. If we keep going, if we refuse to let anything get in our way, the Lord will be there waiting for us as well. I wonder tonight, today in this audience, maybe you need to change. Maybe you need to become the Christian that you've always wanted to be. Maybe you haven't already started your race with Christ. As we sing the invitation song, if you need to respond, come right now. Together we sing together.